So I have a ton of notes on my phone that I've taken during my first and my second pregnancy of my symptoms. So I'm just going to give you a week by week breakdown of what I've been experiencing, and I'll do a little comparison between the two. Hi lovelies and welcome, it's Funto here, I hope you're well. So I'm going to start from what would be week 2, which is the first week wait after trying to conceive, and I had no symptoms whatsoever. Week 3, so this is the second week after conceiving, so the second week of the 2-week wait, and first time around I had no symptoms up until the day before I was due to start my period, and I had light cramping, lower backache, and those typical PMS symptoms that were making me think that I was actually about to start my period. Second time round, I didn't feel anything at all. Week 4, so this is when I actually got a positive pregnancy test on both my first and second pregnancies. And in my first pregnancy, there's quite a few symptoms that I had. So of course, I had a late period and I was feeling mild cramping and an achy lower back. So it very much felt like those early pregnancy symptoms, and I continued to feel them after having the positive pregnancy test. I actually noticed that I was very thirsty from week 4, which is actually quite early. I didn't feel thirst as early as this in my second pregnancy. It took a few more weeks for me to feel symptoms in general, but I felt very thirsty in week 4 of my first pregnancy. And I also noticed that I was starting to feel bloated. I was waking up quite early in the morning to go to the bathroom, which is very unlike me. I tend not to go to the bathroom during the night, so I knew this was definitely a pregnancy one. In my first pregnancy, I noticed that my nipples started to get larger, more prominent, and quite sore. And these are all symptoms that I didn't feel in my second pregnancy. As I mentioned before, I think it's because of the breastfeeding. I didn't notice any changes until much later. I started to fall asleep in the middle of the day at week 4, which is crazy. I feel like it seems really early to be feeling all of these things, but I felt quite a lot of things early on in my first pregnancy. Second time around, I didn't feel so tired in the week that I got my test. It took me until week 6 to actually start to feel that tiredness kicking in. Week 5, so this is when the hunger kicked in for me in my first pregnancy. I was definitely feeling hungrier and starting to get cravings for very specific meals. This was also when my hunger and cravings kicked in for my second pregnancy. I think the food change was one of the earliest changes that I noticed second time around when I was pregnant. I've made a note here though that in week 5, I was having these symptoms, but they weren't daily and they weren't super intense. It's like I'd have some days where I felt a bit more tired, some days where I felt a bit more hungry, some days where I have cravings, and some days where I felt the same. Week 6, so I had stronger cravings by week 6, and I think this is when the hunger and the cravings started to pick up more, both in my first and my second pregnancy. So in my first pregnancy at week 6, that was when I started to feel more changes in my breasts and they started to get bigger, which is a big difference from when I felt it in my second pregnancy, which is much later on. I went off sweet foods, which is so unlike me. In my first pregnancy by week 6, I had no interest in chocolate, which is like my biggest sweet craving. I love sweet things. I have a big sweet tooth, so this is definitely out of character for me. My second pregnancy by week 6, I was feeling very hungry, and I noticed that a hearty meal like porridge for breakfast just did nothing. It just went straight through me and I was hungry 2 hours later, which is wild. I also started to feel unwell in my second pregnancy. So one of the biggest differences is that second time around, my early pregnancy has been in December, so right in the heart of flu season when it's cold and miserable, and I have been fighting colds, which is not fun when you're pregnant and you can't take Lemsip. Whereas first time round, I was pregnant closer to spring, so I didn't really have any cold symptoms. I didn't experience feeling unwell. Week 7, a raised heart rate. So my usual resting heart rate is more around in the 50s, 60, but since being pregnant, it shot up to 70 or 80s, which is kind of crazy and just goes to show how much more work my body's doing. Still less interested in sweet foods and feeling quite bloated. Second pregnancy by week 7, I have just been knackered, and this is when the 9 hours of sleep kicked in. Week 8, I actually have the same symptoms for both first and second pregnancies, which is crazy. I have a lower appetite in general, which is interesting. I specifically have a lower appetite for repeated meals. So I'm a total meal prepper and I like to bulk cook meals at the start of the week, so we have lots of things to last us all week and I don't have to be cooking every day. But that just was not doing it for me, both first time and second time around. I wanted different meals for every meal, which can kind of be tough to keep up with. Second time round, by this point, I also noticed that I was needing to go to the bathroom a lot more. Week 9, more cravings. First time it was ice cold drinks. Second time round, it was croissants. Week 10, so in my first pregnancy, I've got it down here that I started to notice having night sweats, which is quite unusual, but it is a symptom that I did read about, that just where fluids are changing your body and your body temperature is changing, you might sweat sometimes. So I experienced night sweats, which is kind of gross. Second time round, week 10, is when I first started to feel like my bump was showing, which is so much earlier than my first pregnancy. First pregnancy, I don't think I was showing until maybe like week 16. So it's quite a big difference, but all the muscles are already loose down there. So I feel like the second there was a little bit of pressure, my stomach gave way. Week 11, in my first pregnancy here, I have wisdom tooth ache. That's interesting. So you probably may know that your teeth and gums can be quite sensitive during pregnancy. And you're also at greater risk of things like gingivitis, which is why on the NHS they give you free dental care during pregnancy and a year after giving birth, which I think is really incredible. So make use of your dental care and make sure you see the dentist once you find out you're pregnant. I also did feel this in my second pregnancy, where I had a few days where my gums were just a bit sore. They didn't bleed or anything, but they did feel noticeably more sore. Second time round, week 11, I started to have a bit of a lower back ache. So for me, getting lower backaches here and there during pregnancy is definitely a thing, and I felt this one quite early on this time. And week 12 is the first baby scan, which is always such a highlight for me in pregnancy. I love that first scan. It's like when it all becomes very real. So first pregnancy at 12 weeks, I've noted that I was still feeling knackered, and I'd also started to feel very congested, and you can probably still hear that I've got a stuffy nose going on, because that is something I get really badly during pregnancy, really stuffy, particularly at nighttime. And I've had this also in my second pregnancy, but it developed a bit later on, and it developed at the start of the second trimester. Don't worry, I'll do a video breaking down those symptoms as well. In my second pregnancy at week 12, I was just still feeling very tired, very hungry, and very thirsty. I feel like those are the three main symptoms I've had, and they can be kind of intense. So those are my first trimester symptoms. I feel like as far as first trimesters go, it's been kind of uneventful, and honestly, I'm just so thankful to the Lord that I haven't felt any nausea or morning sickness. I do feel like my symptoms have been relatively mild compared to what first trimester symptoms can be. So I'm extremely grateful, and I don't take that lightly. But it's just good to give you an idea of what some first trimesters look like, and hopefully yours goes smoothly too. Do give this a thumbs up if you found it helpful, and if you're new around here, please consider subscribing to stay up to date with the rest of my journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.